Hi, my name is Madeline and welcome to today's watercolor tutorial. We will be painting this dreamy lighthouse landscape. As I prepare my paper, I wanted to quickly talk about our reference photo for today. This is the entire reference photo, but I am going to be cropping it. I want the lighthouse to be on the very right-hand side of our landscape, and I am going to have the rocks end shortly before the left edge of our landscape. So right now I'm using Arch 600 GSM 300-pound paper. It is cold pressed and I am going to be painting with handmade paints today. So to start off, I am going to sketch out where the rocks are going to be, and it's because I am going to use masking tape to sort of mask off our lighthouse. I'm not actually going to be using masking fluid. I have a love-hate relationship with masking fluid. I feel like if you need to actually paint in the area that's being masked off, that sometimes the masking fluid can kind of make the paper that it's masking a little bit rough. So I'm actually just taking some thin masking tape and I'm just sort of cutting it so that it is the size and shape of our lighthouse. Now I'm going to grab my Princeton 2-inch modeler brush and I'm going to wet our sky, and then I am going to grab my Polina Bright Round 2 brush and we're going to start painting our beautiful sunset sky. I'm going to pick up a warm darkish pink and I'm going to start at the horizon. So the sky in our reference photo is a beautiful light and soft purple, and so in order to create that light, I'm going to create the darkness by highlighting the very bottom of the sky where the rocks are, and the upper edge of our sky, that's going to be our dark points. And then sort of in between, I'm going to let the paint be a little bit more like washed out so that it creates, so that it doesn't look flat. Now I'm picking up a little bit of yellow that I'm diluting on my paint palette, and I'm just going to add a hint of yellow on the upper right hand corner. I think the yellow and the pink just really go well together, and so like I said, the very top and the very bottom of the sky is going to be darker for me. And then now I am going to grab a little bit of just water and I'm gonna kind of bring the water down. This is gonna be the ocean right below the rocks. And I'm picking up some purple. I would say this is a true dioxazine purple color. I had somebody on the live this past Monday ask me to swatch this color out and what color it was similar to, and I think it's very similar to my M-gram dioxazine purple. Now I'm grabbing some indigo, and the very bottom of the square of our landscape, I'm gonna have a very dark indigo, and I'm gonna get it really dark by just doing multiple layers. Our watercolors always dry a little bit lighter than how it looks when it's wet. So the way that I achieve darker colors is by really creating multiple layers of color. What I'm doing right here is I'm letting the paint dry just a little bit, not entirely because I don't want any hard lines, but I'm letting like a minute or two go by, and then I'm adding in another layer of color. And that's one way to kind of get the intensity of our colors to That's one way to create more intensity of colors without having to do like multiple layers of like painting and drying and painting and drying. I just let the paper get a little bit drier and then I do another layer. I'm going to completely dry this off now, and I'm going to grab, this is a Tintoretto mop brush. I like this brush because it's a mop brush, but it has kind of a fine point. And so I'm going to be smushing the brush, and I'm going to be loosely painting the rocks that we have right on our little inlet of land that the lighthouse is on. So for reference, here is the reference photo again, and you see how the rocks are just kind of really jaggedy. The light is hitting the faces of the rocks on some of the rocks, and then it's shadows and darkness on other rocks. So the way that I'm painting this is I'm just kind of like very loosely painting brush strokes, and I'm leaving some space because I'm going to add several layers of color, and I want the watercolor to sort of bleed into each other. So this first layer of pink is the same pink that I used for the sky. And then now I'm going to come in with a warm purple. It's not the same purple that I used for the water. This is just a little bit warmer, and I'm coming in and adding some darker edges so that it feels like the light is hitting the rocks in different places, and you kind of get that raggedy look. And so I'm just gonna kind of space out these darker purple brush strokes, and I'm gonna kind of paint in the bottom. And now I'm gonna grab a brown. This is kind of like a sepia, and I'm gonna do the same thing that I just did, but in different areas. I'm gonna add some darkness to these rocks. And so what we are essentially doing is we are creating the many layers of facets of the rocks without having to like individually paint each one. We're using the different colors in our watercolor to create that texture and that 3D-ness that we see in the reference photo. And then now I'm just grabbing a little bit of neutral tint and I'm dropping it in some areas so that we have multiple colors going on, and that's sort of kind of how I envision these rocks. And it's a really loose way to do it in watercolor. So now I'm drying it off, and it's time for me to peel off our masking tape. And so the lighthouse is really, really white. And so in the reference photo, the lighthouse is a little bit warm with color. So the first thing I'm going to do is I am going to grab a fountain pen, and I'm actually going to outline the lighthouse. I don't really feel like if I use like a liner and some black paint, it's really hard for me to get really straight lines or edges. So I'm just going to kind of quickly do it with a fountain pen. That way it gives the lighthouse some contrast. It makes it kind of stand out from the background, and I don't have to worry about doing it with a really fine watercolor brush. I'm also going to kind of draw out where the windows would be on the lighthouse. And yeah, I wouldn't want to do this with a watercolor brush. So sometimes it's just nice to have a fountain pen nearby. And I am using waterproof ink, but I made the mistake of not drying it because my brush flipped right here, and that thought of drying it went out my brain. So I start adding water to the lighthouse, and the ink hasn't completely dried. So next time, make sure to dry your ink. I am going to be adding watercolor to it, so I'm not too worried that the ink is bleeding a little bit. But yes, I'm wetting everything except for the windows. And then I'm going to grab some of the purple that I used just below the lighthouse and some of the pink that I used for the sky. I'm going to mix those two colors together, and I'm going to dilute it a little bit on the palette that I have above us. And I am going to paint in the lighthouse. And in the reference photo, there is more shadow on the left side of the lighthouse. I think our light source is coming from the right. And I do have that shown in our sky. The right part of our landscape is a little bit brighter. And so after I fill it in with this kind of soft purple color, I am going to come in with the purple that we used for our rocks, and I'm just going to line the left side of the lighthouse to just give it a little bit of a shadow. And so that's what I'm doing right here, just creating some darkness and some shadow on that left side. Now I am going to dry everything off, and I'm going to come in, and I'm using the same brush. This is an Etcher round 3, and I'm going to just paint in the upper part of our lighthouse. Now I'm going to pick up some yellow, and I'm going to add yellow to the windows because the reference photo has light coming out from the windows, and I love that. The yellow kind of contrasting with the purple. And I'm looking at the top of my lighthouse, and it doesn't look, it looks like a little weird. It looks a little flat actually. So I'm going to grab a liner brush, and I'm just going to add some more kind of like poles so that it kind of gives the very top of the lighthouse some more dimension. And now I want to show you how I'm going to paint the door. So this is my liner pen. This is actually my bird brush. It's a Princeton Select 10/0, but I'm going to use it to paint our door because the door is it has quite fine lines. So I'm using brown or sepia, and I'm painting the door frame, and then I'm going to dry it, and then I'm going to fill in the door because the door is a little bit darker than the color of the lighthouse. So I'm going to get the same mixture that I used to fill in the lighthouse. I'm going to use that paint to kind of fill in the door so that it looks darker than, this is a little bit more concentrated than what I used to paint the lighthouse. But I'm going to dry that, and then the doorpost has kind of like 2 bars that I really like. It makes the door look and feel really rustic, so I'm going to copy that. I'm just going to grab more brown, and I'm going to paint those bars, or I don't know what you would call that like door decor. And then I'm going to just add some more dark brown right behind the lighthouse right here because there's kind of like a white gap, and I want it to feel like these are the rocks behind the lighthouse right there. And I'm going to dry all of that off. I'm really liking how the landscape is going so far. And the last thing that I want to do is add a small flock of birds. I've been feeling kind of like off my bird game lately, so I'm going to cross my fingers and hope these birds come out okay. But the tips that I have for painting birds is to always use a very dilute amount of paint. If your paint is chunky at all, it's not going to give you a very fine line for your very fine brush stroke for your birds. And if your birds are chunky at all, it just doesn't look good. So those are my tips, and my flock actually came out okay. So I'm happy about that. And that's the very last step. So I'm going to dry everything off, and then I'm going to peel our masking tape border. And I really, surprisingly, really enjoyed painting this landscape. I'm so happy for all of you guys that voted. I always feel like what I want to paint, what I think is going to be popular, is actually never the picture that gets voted on. So this is a really fun way for me to sort of like check the pulse on what you guys all want. And so I really hope you like this landscape. I hope you paint it. If you do, please tag me on Instagram. I'd love to see it. And yeah, thank you again and happy painting. If you liked this tutorial, please hit the like button. It's a really small way to help my channel grow. And if you enjoy my content, use the following QR codes to either find me on Patreon or Instagram.